Hello, welcome to the Baseball Alliance podcast. My name is Sean Morash. I am your host this week from offthebenchbaseball.com. That's my home site. I can be followed on Twitter at OTBB_Sean. This broadcast is brought to you by the Baseball Bloggers Alliance. We are a group of like-minded baseball bloggers who advertise and promote one another aggressively. It's the key word here. This podcast is an effort to cross-promote across the BBBA membership. And so luckily, we have today with us Daniel Shoptaw of Cardinals. He's a Cardinals blogger. I'm going to butcher his URL, cardsonclave.com. Daniel, you want to give the people a better introduction than what I just did?
Well, that's fine, but yeah, I write for the blog C70 at the Bat. Is part of the Cardinals Conclave, is a group of Cardinal blogs. I can be found on Twitter at C70. Have 2 or 3 various podcasts that you can find through that way, and founded the BBA a long time ago, and also have the United Cardinals bloggers under my belt. So I do way too much stuff.
Hey, it looks like you have a dog there too.
Yes. I have a dog. I have a wife. I have 2 kids, and I actually work occasionally too. So it's a fun life.
Awesome. Well, thanks for spending a little bit of time here with me. We were supposed to have with us this guy named Scott from philsbaseball.com.
Mm-hmm.
And he really wanted to talk about Vince Velasquez, but since he's not here, I guess we could talk about Vince Velasquez, or we could talk about the young, exciting pitchers that the Cardinals have.
If we stick with the Cardinals, I'm going to know a lot more about it. So yeah, let's go that route.
All right. Well, I've got Carlos Martinez on my fantasy squad, and he has been underperforming.
Mm-hmm.
What's the deal?
Well, it's obviously the hair. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's the dreadlocks that he's. No, that's a big question in the Cardinal sphere of trying to figure out what really is with Carlos, because he's kind of fluctuates not from game to game, but from inning. He'll have a couple of games ago, terrible first inning, and then shut down and got the next 10 or 11 in a row out. I don't know. The Cardinals signed him to an extension over the offseason, and he's kind of been installed as the de facto ace of the staff. I don't think anybody's put that title on him, but I don't know. I think there may be a little bit of pressure for him to try to live up to that role. It feels like he's maybe trying to mature, trying to contain himself a little more, and that may not be what Carlos Martinez is. He may be a guy that really needs to be. I mean, we've seen him he pitched well in the WBC, and had I think we all talked about how the World Baseball Classic brought out the emotion in people on all teams. It just may be something that he needs to really tap into a little bit more to be a little bit more consistent.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny because when you get that title of ace, right? On Off the Bench, we always capitalize ace because there's this connotation. It's like the trademark Twitter, right?
Right.
But when Martinez wasn't this ace with this big contract, the last 2 years, I'm looking at his numbers right now. He had a 3.02 ERA in 60 games, almost 400 innings pitched. Like, that is ace material. And now all of a sudden he's the opening day starter, and he's still striking guys out, but he's giving up some hits. Is it just kind of one of these where he's running into some bad luck, or is it? It's not the stuff. There's got to be an answer.
You would think so. I think there is a little bit of bad luck in there. I think that's something that's probably going to work its way out. But again, I mean, I think that we tend to think of prospects and players as improving linearly, that they're going to be better this year than last year. Sometimes they take a little bit of a step back. That may just be what we're seeing here.
That's totally fair. Speaking of guys like that, the Cardinals have another righty, Michael Wacha, who burst onto the scene. I would, but really dominated in the playoffs, and now isn't quite the guy that maybe we thought he was going to be.
The idea with Wacha always seemed to be that he was going to have a very he might have a high floor but a low ceiling, and he was going to get to what he was going to be very quickly. But he's had the stress reaction in his shoulder over the last couple of years, something that's not really easy to fix. As we've seen a few other pitchers, Brandon McCarthy, I think, is one that has had that, and they don't always bounce back. So far this year, he's looked very good, and I think the Cardinals are kind of dealing with it as much as they can, trying to get the most out of him before maybe that injury strikes again. But if he can keep it up the way he's going right now, they feel pretty good about it. But you just kind of hold your breath.
Absolutely, yeah, he's going well. I just pulled up his stats here. It looks like I also pulled up Scott. Are you there? Do we have audio?
Yep. Can you see
Awesome.
me?
Yeah, we don't have the visual so well. It's a little slow. But thank you so much for joining. We transitioned right over the Vince Velasquez discussion, and we were getting after the Cardinals' young pitching. So if you have anything to chime in there, you're more than welcome. But what are you a little jealous of where the Cardinals are pitching wise? As the Phillies are kind of a younger squad.
I mean, I'm jealous of the Cardinals all the time. It seems like all they do there is win. Once again, you're right close to first place. So yeah, I'm always jealous.
Well, it's nice to know. We engender that, unfortunately, at times. But by the way, hi, Scott. How are you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Pretty good.
Excellent. Yeah, sorry we had some joining trouble there. These Hangouts are awesome, but they don't ever work right. So maybe they're not that awesome. No, yeah, the Cardinals are this model of consistency. And it seems like they always bring up a guy who outperforms what he's supposed to do. Is there a guy so far this year that's doing that?
I guess if you're going to look at a guy, it wouldn't be a guy that's been brought up, but it's been Matt Bowman. The Cardinals had him last year as a Rule 5 player from the Mets, and you know how Rule 5 players are. You just never really expect a lot out of them, but he pitched very well for them last year, and he actually had a scoreless streak, I think, of about 18, 19 innings snapped just recently. Now, he apparently did not pitch that well today. I'm going to have to wait and see that later on, but he's been a guy that the Cardinals have really relied on more than you would expect for a guy that was pretty much given to them by the Mets through the Rule 5 draft.
Is he a relief pitcher?
Yeah, he's a middle. He was a starter in the Mets organization. The Cardinals have put him in, and he really started out as a 6th and 7th inning guy, mainly 6th inning guy. But he's kind of gotten a little bit higher leverage opportunities over the last, especially this year.
Yeah, that's interesting because their bullpen is fascinating. Trevor Rosenthal just comes out and throws absolute bullets, but he's got a little bit of an arm issue going on, and then was amazing last year, but has stumbled a little bit out of the gate now. Their bullpen reads like it should really be a strength, and has it been so far?
It has been better as of late. The first couple of weeks when they got into that, they were down, 3 wins to 9 losses. The bullpen was a problem. It's still flaring up. It flared up tonight. The Cardinals had a 4-0 lead, and right now sitting down 5-4 to the Reds. It has its moments where it blows up, and Jonathan Broxton's still a weak link, but for the most part, it's starting to gel. Brett Cecil is starting to come together finally after the signing they had. Trevor Rosenthal is looking well, and then he's not dominant like it was last year, but he's well enough. So I think overall it's going to be a strength this year.
Were you pleased with the Brett Cecil signing?
I think so. I think that the Cardinals would not have signed him if Zach Duke is going to be healthy this year, but they, because they had him under contract, and then Duke goes out, and I think he had Tommy John surgery. He's out for the year. Cecil is, looks like a guy that, and I hadn't seen much of him being an American League guy, but it seems to be a guy that was fairly effective, and a guy that could, pitch against righties as well as lefties. Be probably a 7th inning, they could go Cecil, Rosenthal, in the 7th, 8th, 9th, and lock a lot of games down. At least it looked like.
Yeah, but everything you talked about was kind of 1 inning there, or one just this year, and,
right.
And 1 inning, and I'm looking at it, man, and $30 million for kind of 2017, and then worry about bullpen construction in later years. I guess that makes me nervous, but I'm a Braves fan, and we don't have the luxury of $8 million bullpen arms.
Well, yeah, I mean there is the ability to pay for that. The Cardinals right now do have the financial wherewithal to do that, and I think they did want to lock a guy up long term. That's one less piece that they have to worry about. The cost certainty is something that the Cardinals are huge on. Really knowing what they're going to need to spend over the next few years. You saw them, extending Molina. You saw them extending Piscotty. You give Martinez that deal. They're starting to know what they're going to look like as they get into maybe what could be a really big free agents class at the end of 2018.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess, it's kind of nice to have a guy like Brett Cecil because you know about what you're going to get from him. But with the Braves, I know I'm looking at how the Braves rotation or bullpen is set up, and we've got this guy Ian Kroll, we've got Eric O'Flaherty, Jose Ramirez. They're all over the place in terms of how well they're pitching, basically.
Right.
And it's because they're these scrap heap guys, and they're kind of like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get from one day to the next. And it's frustrating as all get out from a fan perspective. And I can only imagine what it is from an organizational perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Now the other thought I had on the Cardinals really is when I look at Matt Carpenter's role, he doesn't scream to me like his best utilization is at first base. And that kind of gets to how Matt Carpenter and Matt Adams are kind of overlapping players at this point in their careers. Are you happy with that construction or the way that kind of all of the Cardinals pieces fit together?
It's an interesting lineup construction. Let's put our roster construction for sure. There is a lot of redundancy with Adams and Carpenter. Now, Carpenter's obviously the better player, but you've got two left-handed guys that are playing first base. Carpenter's defense is really the only reason. I mean, they moved into first base because third base was kind of iffy. Second base, his glove is okay, but, you got Colton Wong there. They thought, that would be better than moving him around the diamond was be to stick him at one spot. The results have not been all that great. I don't think. I think he's still learning, trying to figure out how to play first base. I don't know. I like Carpenter, but I don't feel Carpenter's that guy that you have to just lock in place. I think he can move around, especially when the options are then putting Matt Adams in the left field, and that was not good at all. You'd much rather see Carpenter play some third and Adams play some first. And we may see that somewhat. I think John Mozeliak kind of come down and said, we're not going to do the outfield thing anymore. And we did see a game earlier this week with Adams playing first and Carpenter at third. So I think we see that combination a few more times this year.
Absolutely. Would you think one of them is a trade candidate here?
I think if Adams could build up any kind of value, he would be the trade guy. I was really surprised that they didn't trade him in the offseason, and that may have been part of the idea of putting him in the outfield, see if he could just at least be passable out there and increase some value. But yeah, I think he's a trade candidate. When Johnny Peralta comes back, if Peralta can get his value up, I think he's a trade candidate. And maybe one of those things where they can, maybe package both of them off for, some sort of minor league help or something. They're going to have to do some things because there are a lot of guys that seem to be stuck in the same positions and don't have the opportunity to play every day.
Kind of reminds me of a little bit of what the Dodgers have going on in that they have a bunch of pieces that are maybe above average, but nobody that really screams out, I need to be the starter above anybody else. Yeah,
there's that. One of the things the Cardinals really need is that overall, that real star, and they don't have that right now.
Well, that's not really the Cardinals, the way they build their club, though. Is it? Has it ever been that way?
Well, I mean, you had Albert Pujols for a decade plus. Before that, you had Mark McGwire. They're better about growing their guys or getting them at a young age. But yeah, since Pujols left and after 11, it's been more pitching focused about having the stars on that side. Adam Wainwright, Chris Carpenter. But it feels like the team needs that thumper. They have done a lot of complementary players, but they don't have that real anchor core to complement.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. I like how you kind of drew that line there between when Pujols left, then all of a sudden Carpenter and Wainwright stepped right up.
Mm-hmm.
And Now on the pitching side, Carlos Martinez isn't quite, he's not that perennial Cy Young guy yet.
Mhm.
And nobody on the offensive side is, we're not going to compare anybody to Pujols, but nobody is up there in that, perennial all-star even type guy. So
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to think that in a couple of years, Alex Reyes is going to be that way. Carlos Martinez may develop that way, but offensively, I mean, they like Steven Piscotty, but Piscotty's a guy that's good at a lot of things, not necessarily great at anything. And there's not anybody there. They really miss Oscar Tavares. I think that was where that star was going to be. But the loss of him made them kind of scramble around. And I think they're really going to have to go out and get that piece that puts a little bit more thump or a little bit more fear maybe in the lineup.
Yeah, it's tough.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough how those, as an organization, Oscar Tavares passed away 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the organization still is trying to map out where they're at, where they're going.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, they scrambled. They got Hayward, and Hayward, left, and they're still trying to put those pieces together.
Yeah, so Hayward's one of these divisive characters. I actually wanted to ask you about him today because it seems like as a Braves fan, I never saw him really at his best. And then he put up that good year in St. Louis. And when he was doing that, did you believe in it, or was it like kind of a surprise every time he had a good game?
Well, early on, he really started off slow, which hurt. But by the end of the year, I think we kind of, one, the defense was always there, obviously. But, I think we kind of got adjusted and felt like there was something more there, and that there was good, and that he could continue to make that step. And I mean, most Cardinal fans wanted the Cardinals to go out and sign him. They made him a $200 million offer. But once he went to Chicago, a lot of the good feelings went away. So he not mentioned a lot in St. Louis these days.
Yeah. So you trusted him by the end of the year enough to offer him a $200 million contract.
Oh, sorry, I missed that one.
No, so kind of the question, my thought is, I never trusted him as a Braves fan, and I think the Cubs fans right now don't trust him at all. Is there an organization out there that he has some trust with, that he could, that believes in him after seeing him in a day in, day out basis?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think it's going to take him a while to build up that trust factor again.
Okay. All right. I don't believe in him. But that's just me. So, Scott, I know you've been sitting there patiently. Daniel, thank you so much for joining. You're definitely welcome to hang out, and I'm gonna try to transition a little bit to some Phillies, and kind of the other side of the spectrum as in terms of who has been in the playoffs recently. So I'm a Braves fan. I'm allowed to say stuff like that, but we're going to talk maybe about, instead of coming down the age curve, we're going to be coming up the age curve. I don't know if that's a fair characterization of either of the organizations, really, but it's how I feel about them. So,
yeah, I think we're pretty close. We're in the same boat.
Okay, excellent. So, Daniel, you think you're sticking around, or
I'll stay away for a while. I want to hear what Scott has to say.
Absolutely.
Uh-oh.
Well, so I jump around all over the place, right? And I sit down and I say, all right, I'm going to write something about the Phillies. And I wrote something about the Phillies in November. And I was like, man, their infield is awesome. If they could have a good offseason, as a front office put together a good offseason, they could really put something special out there. I was a little disappointed. Am I right in that aspect, or what is your general feeling about where the organization is heading right now?
Disappointed as in they should have brought in like a free agent or something like that?
Yeah, maybe supplemented that infield core a little bit better. I know that they've got some outfield prospects, but they traded for Clay Buchholz, and that to me was a pretty bad trade when it happened, and now he's got some injury problems.
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually kind of look at it totally the opposite of that. I mean, I see the Phillies as, they're in this rebuild and they have a lot of these prospects waiting to play. You bring someone into the team now, you might be taking the spot of somebody else who should be coming up. And they've got a shortstop down in the minors, J.P. Crawford. So he obviously I'd rather anybody other than Galvis at shortstop, but he's not quite ready yet. So you're not gonna really spend any money there. The Buchholz thing, and I've heard what you said from a lot of people. They're like, you just wasted $13 million. That's a lot of money to be spending on a guy. But the way I kind of look at it, they're looking for a trade chip. And how many teams have the kind of money, and the Phillies have absolutely no money spending on anybody. How many teams are able to literally throw away $13 million on the off chance they could trade a guy at the deadline? So obviously it totally blew up in their face, but he would have sucked anyways. I think you could tell that already. But
so what's the Phillies' financial situation? You said they don't have any money, but it seems like just recently they were kind of drowning in money.
Oh, well, I mean, they're not spending any money. I mean, right now they have one player that's guaranteed money next year, and that's Odubel Herrera. Nobody else is guaranteed anything yet. So they have a lot of money to spend. They just got this new Comcast deal where they're getting, what, $250 million a year or something like that. But the owner came on and he said he's trying to find ways to spend money. But they're they're saying, let's just wait a little bit, and when the time is right, I really think they will start spending.
Yeah. That's what the comment didn't make much sense to me in terms of how I know the Phils like to spend money. Should they be making a splash in, like the international free agent market this year? Do you think they're gonna go after who's the guy in Japan? Shante Oteo?
Yeah, I forget what his name is. I want him.
Yeah, I mean everybody wants him, right? He's a lot of fun, and he seems like he could help any organization in any way. So you think the Phils are kind of stockpiling their chips for a guy like him?
I don't know. I mean, it's tough to tell with that international stuff. But I mean, if I were running things, I would do anything and everything. I'd sign Yu Darvish just so we can get this guy to come here. But I don't know if it's that easy because they've got these caps on everybody. I don't know what you have to do to get this guy in here, but I'm sure they would love to bring him in. But I mean, I do see the Phillies spending money soon. How soon I guess depends on how some of these prospects come up. But I wouldn't be surprised if they start to spend a little bit this year, and then 2018, I'm sure they'll be in the Harper Machado sweepstakes and everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw they've got a guy making a start this week, a prospect, right?
Yeah, he's actually pitched today, made his debut. I mean, he looks pretty good. They got him in the Papelbon trade. So, I mean, if you can get anything for Papelbon, I think that's a win. So, I mean, we'll see. He had like a .95 ERA in 3 starts in the minors. So he looks pretty good. Zach Eflin just pitched last night. It was, and he's another. I mean, they've got a lot of good young pitchers. We don't have like the superstar ace yet, but they've got quite a few.
I think that Vince Velasquez might be that type of guy. He doesn't have that reputation, but I really am a fan of kind of his repertoire.
Oh, I totally am too. I mean, he throws hard. He's got movement. I mean, if he can just learn how to pitch deeper in games, I mean, he's got ace written all over him. So he's definitely, if there's one guy, it's got to be him.
Okay. Yeah, because the Astros so Vince Velasquez came over from the Astros in the Ken Giles trade, right? Yeah, so the Astros seemed to crown Lance McCullers as their, next ace. But then all of a sudden they brought up Vince Velasquez, before they brought up Lance McCullers, and Velasquez was very good. And then the Phillies were like, yes, please, we'll have him. And he's still, it seems like his ratios are very good, but he maybe has been held back by injuries or when can we expect the great Vince Velasquez season or coming out party?
I mean, I'd say this might be a full year, kind of, because his problem has been so far. I mean, you're right. He's got the great stats. I mean, over 10 strikeouts per 9 innings, but he wasn't pitching past the fifth inning very much at all, and his pitch counts were just going sky high. And he kept saying, I don't want the strikeouts. I want to pitch longer, deeper into games. But it wasn't until 2 starts ago he totally changed his repertoire, and he didn't strike out barely anybody, and he was pitching deeper into games. So I really see he's still a young pitcher, and he's trying to figure out who he is, I think. And I think he's hearing a lot of conflicting reports from different people on how to pitch. So I think at the end of the year, we'll probably have an idea. If he's still pitching 5-6 innings max in a game, I think they're probably going to consider moving him to the bullpen. But I mean, I've heard from the Phillies, they're willing to be patient.
So he's the same age, roughly. I mean, they're both is their age 25 season as Carlos Martinez, and that's a little bit of what Daniel was saying earlier. Was that Carlos Martinez is still kind of trying to figure out who he is. In previous years he was a number 2, and now the Cardinals are asking him to be an ace, and the results aren't ideal. Obviously Vince Velasquez isn't being asked to be the ace yet, but the results, he still is figuring out who he is.
Yeah, it totally is. And I'm trying to look. There was someone tweeted out here. They compared him to Roy Halladay and Cliff Lee. Okay, yes, they said. So which one? So Velasquez is pitcher A in this graphic I'm looking at. He was age 24 to 25, and he averaged 5.4 innings per start. Cliff Lee, same age, averaged 5.5 innings per start. Roy Halladay, age 22-23, averaged 5.3 innings per start. So obviously he's a young pitcher. You put him in that kind of company. Young pitchers are young pitchers, and I think before you call him an ace, you better give him some chance to grow into that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I've been. I went out on a limb and called Mike Foltynewicz, kind of a Jake Arrieta 2.0, and my co-blogger on Off the Bench has tried to. He texts me every Foltynewicz start and tells me how wrong I am, but he's in the same boat. He's 25, and just this year, or just this last 2 or 3 starts, he started to look like what I thought he looked like 3 years ago, which is kind of entertaining. But it's the same thing where young pitchers take a while to grow up and figure out who they are.
Exactly.
So in order to make this podcast be a little bit friendlier to other audiences, we had Syndergaard, right? Syndergaard came up and he knew exactly who he was, and so did the rest of baseball. He's a guy that throws 102, throws it right past you, has a nasty slider, nothing you can do about it. And he showed up on the planet born to do that. But today and last week, kind of over the last week, we've had this saga of like an arm injury. And it's kind of one of these young pitchers you never know what to do with them. Even if you know who they are, are you sure you can trust them?
Yeah.
And Syndergaard's one of these sad stories where as soon as we start hearing about arm problems, it just makes sense, right? Because the human body is just not meant to throw 102 consistently unless your name's Ryan.
Yeah. Well, and that one's weird too. So what are they saying about Matt Harvey? Is because the way I heard it, he filled in for the Syndergaard start, and his velocity was dropping during the game.
Yeah.
Is he hurt again?
Harvey's kind of funny. I watched that game, and his slider was just not good. His velocity was going down, and he said after the game that he physically wasn't prepared to pitch because it wasn't his day to pitch. And the former college baseball player in me says, well, Harvey probably was a little hungover. So I don't think there's too much concern about him, but he's another guy. You're exactly right, where he comes up and just lights the world on fire, takes a step back, and gets his arm hurt, and now he's still trying to figure out who he is. Yeah, it's kind of one of these tricky situations about building perennial contenders around young pitching. Basically, you have to be careful what you get yourself into.
Yeah, it's a dangerous game for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I mean, that makes me nervous as a Braves fan, right? Because we have the world's greatest minor league pitching staffs, and Lord knows what we're going to get, right? So
yeah, it's way more unpredictable, that's for sure. You know, I mean, it's a lot safer to have a bunch of young hitters. It's a lot easier to project those guys. I mean, just look at the Mets. You know, like, I mean, they're a total mess right now.
yeah, and I mean, the young hitters is kind of how the Royals made their run for so long. They had this stable of young position players that they built around and supplemented with pitchers who were somehow good, plus a nasty bullpen. And I think the rest of baseball looked at that and was like, "Oh, okay, we're going to build a lot of young pitchers. Like, we're going to build around young pitchers," and that seems like kind of backwards to me.
Well, and I mean, to jump in, the Cubs did the opposite. I mean, they did the hitters last year, and then they went out and bought John Lester, they bought John Lackey, they bought a pitching staff that's still. I mean, they traded for Jake Arrieta, but a pitching staff that may or may not be able to sustain that. But that was their philosophy, was to develop those young hitters and worry about buying established pitchers. And you're right, there's definitely a reason to think that, because as we know, there's no such thing as a pitching prospect.
Yeah. So as the Cardinals do a great job of getting everybody. They have young position players come up all the time. It feels like you got to always have another young pitcher on the horizon. So I'm kind of discounting that the Cardinals are always going to have a little bit of both, and they don't have to choose, right? Have the Phillies chosen one way or the other about if they're building a stable of pitching prospects or hitting position player prospects?
Well, it's actually funny because the Phillies president, he said since he started, Andy McPhail, that you grow pitching, you buy hitting. And he says that even now, especially after like the Buchholz being done after 2 starts or something like that. And he's, he didn't come out and say we won't buy pitching, but I think he's made it very clear that he would much rather spend his money on hitters than on pitchers. So if you look at what the Phillies have, Velasquez, you might call him an ace possibly, but outside of him, you've got a bunch of number 3s and, a whole bunch of possibly decent pitchers, but you don't really have any aces. And it'll be interesting to see, do they go out and spend some money on a pitcher? But it seems pretty clear they want to spend their money on hitting.
Interesting.
Which is interesting because it's almost opposite of what the Cubs did.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Royals for their window.
Yep.
Well, yeah, I totally.
But I guess if you're going to lose pitching time to injuries. I mean, that's just almost guaranteed. There's very few pitchers that make it through. So I guess if you're going to do that, you'd almost rather have it be like the Cardinals lost Alex Reyes this year. And as much as that was a painful thing from a baseball point of view, he was getting $500,000 or whatever the minimum is. When you go out and spend $50, $60, $7 million on a pitcher and then you lose him, that's a lot harder to overcome, especially for a lot of teams to take those resources and try to fill in. So at least hitting is a little bit more reliable when you go out and buy it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. That said, is Cardinals' new center fielder Dexter Fowler? Is he who you thought he was going to be so far this year? Or?
Not yet, but I mean, it is a 4-year contract, and he's coming around. I mean, we've seen more power out of him than I thought we would see. I mean, he had 2 home runs earlier in a game against Pittsburgh. He had a home run again this weekend or against the Blue Jays. We haven't seen him. He's just now getting his average over 200, and we haven't seen him running as much, I don't think, as we thought we would. But He's still kind of adjusting, and it seems like he's been on a tear the last couple of weeks, and that's when the Cardinals have kind of pulled out of things. So, if there's a correlation, then that's a good thing.
Hey, Daniel, let me ask you this. Who would you rather? Forget it, money's no object here. Would you rather Fowler or Hayward?
Well, it's a good question. Without factoring in the money, I think I'd probably want Hayward. Just you do have that as stellar defense, a great arm. I mean, Fowler's good in the outfield, and much better than what the Cardinals are used to. I still think there's a lot of potential there in Hayward. It's getting harder and harder to justify that, I think, although I think he's having a good year this year. Hayward made a good impression in St. Louis, I think, to start with. Now, when he left for Chicago, that kind of got erased. But I think if you just could pick one of the two and not have to worry about what you paid him, I'd probably go Hayward.
Yeah, I probably would too.
Well, it's funny because Dexter Fowler is a guy that I'm looking at his stats here. He's roughly a 2.5, 3 WAR player over the course of his career. Last year, he put up an exceptional year because he was on the Cubs, the 2016 Cubs. But he seems to be more highly thought of throughout the game than a lot of other 2.5, 3 WAR outfielders. The guy I'm particularly thinking of is Brett Gardner. Why is Fowler so well thought of? Is it a smile? Does that help?
Honestly, I think there's a good portion of that. I mean, there is, personality matters as a tiebreaker, and there is some idea of clubhouse chemistry. As much as it can't be quantified, I think there is still something to that. So, I mean, I think that does help you stand out. And he's played in some. I mean, Colorado didn't help him any, but if you can play in Chicago, that always ups your value. Although Gardner's playing in New York, you'd think that would help too. So, I think personality and that gives you favorable press. And that's huge when it comes down to reputation around the game.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I'm talking about that is because I wrote an article this week about if Starling Marte were to be traded right now. And it admittedly is at the bottom of his trade value. But the guys that I had him being traded for were these 2.5, 3 WAR type players because of the discount applied to Marte. You don't know what he's going to be in the future. But the comments that I got for that were rough. And I just couldn't. Maybe it was my analytic mind was driving that, but
yeah, I mean that's reasonable. I mean, Marte is a very different case with the idea that he was, how much of his past has been steroid issues. What's he going to be in the future? You've got the public relations of actually employing him. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of variables there. So you're right. The value for him, no matter what he may be, has got to be extremely low right now.
Yeah, it was a fun thought process for me, and apparently the general internet public did not agree with where I landed. Scott, have you written anything that the general public has vehemently disagreed with?
Not that I can think of lately. That's a good question. I mean, I guess like what I was saying before about Buchholz, I've had to argue with people that was not a totally stupid move.
Yeah. But
I don't know, and I've never understood that, how fans get so bent out of shape. The Phillies lost $13 million. I mean, this isn't going to hurt them from signing anybody, so why do they care? But still, I mean, and we had the same thing happen last year with Charlie Morton. He made 5 starts, blew out his ankle or something like that, and he was done. Here we go, and he was like $9 million. Here you go, $13 million for Buchholz. We got 2 starts out of him. So what are you going to do?
It stinks too because Charlie Morton looked during his last couple starts really looked like he was something special.
Who's he pitching for this year?
He's on the Astros. So
Astros.
I was in the early days of last year with the new StatCast data. I was actively having fun with all the new tools and whatnot. And Charlie Morton was the guy that I kind of championed for no real reason. And so he's this year he's in the top 5 or 6 in terms of average fastball velocity.
Wow.
Yeah, he's throwing 95.5 or something wild. So the Phillies almost struck gold last year with that, and this year they were trying for the same thing, and it seems like it didn't quite pan out.
Yeah, it didn't work out so good.
All right, so I think we're winding down here. The last thing I like to do on these podcasts is a little game called Guess This Random Player that Sean just thought of. So the rule is typically I have to think of this player in the middle of our conversation, and what's fun about it is that my mind is usually all over the place, and so you never know quite what you're going to get. So you guys, as soon as you get the player, just say his name and we'll talk about him for a minute. Unfortunately, I forgot who this guy was playing for this year, or else it would have been a little bit more random. But he's on one of your 2 teams. He is a 36-year-old. Nope, he's on the Braves. He's a 36-year-old relief pitcher. Formerly a Twin, a Padre, an A Cardinal, an Astro, a Philly.
Pat Neshek.
There we go. Yeah.
Wow, well played.
Yeah. So I thought of him in terms of when he was on the Astros. He put together a great year for the Cardinals, and then went and signed with the Astros for a good hefty chunk of money. And then it seemed like the Astros weren't happy with what they got and overtraded for Ken Giles. So Pat Neshek is the thread between the Cardinals, the Astros, and the Phillies right now.
How about that?
Yeah, it looks like he's pitching well so far.
He hasn't given up a run yet.
That's a little bit better than I would have thought. Is he good? Basically, I mean, is he still throwing hard? Is he still this kind of nasty sidearm guy?
I guess I don't. It's really hard to tell because he throws so sidearm like that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't see him as part of our future, so I don't really put too much thought into it. All I know is he's getting outs now.
Neshek is an interesting guy. I remember from his time at the Cardinals, he's such a huge baseball collector, a baseball memorabilia type of guy. In fact, when John Lackey came to the Cardinals in the trade, he wanted Neshek's number. And you know how people, they always, buy it or whatever. John Lackey, he basically found him a Babe Ruth autographed baseball, and that's what he traded to Neshek for Neshek's number, because that was something that Neshek wanted for his collection. He was a great story. I mean, he had some problems in life with his. I think his first child died, and his second one, he had his second child, or when he was in St. Louis, and there were some issues there with the birth. Seemed to be a real great guy, and I think the Cardinals were. It was a situation where he couldn't come back for the Cardinals because of the way the bullpen was, but I think everybody seemed to enjoy having him here, and hopefully he'll do the same as well in Philadelphia this year as well.
That's awesome. It seems like
I'd say he's like a nice guy.
Mm-hmm. It seems like I always pick guys that have these awesome stories that I forget that I ever knew about. Because the first one I picked was Jabba Chamberlain, and he has this awesome, backstory with all the drama associated with his parents and whatnot. But then it turns out that he's an awesome guy and kind of works hard no matter where he is.
Yeah.
But Pat Neshek's been around for a while. I just remembered him when he burst onto the scene with the Cardinals and was so good for you guys. But I guess that's a product of him playing in Minnesota and then San Diego, and then in Oakland, that if you're a middle reliever on one of those 3 teams, you're probably not getting a lot of national spotlight.
No, you're not. If I'm remembering right, I'm trying to think if it was Nishak. I think it was when he was in St. Louis. I think he actually became an all-star that year, and his brother worked the ground crew for the Twins, and the all-star game was in Minnesota. And so there was this, he went to the all-star game that his brother was working because he was ground crew, and it was kind of a neat little story of them getting to both be at the all-star game in different roles.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he's making $6.5 million this year, so
that's good too.
Yeah, that ain't bad.
Hopefully, I'll get $6.5 million for hosting the Baseball Alliance podcast. But so far, this is an unpaid gig.
Yeah, don't hold your breath.
That's the founder of the Baseball Bloggers Alliance telling me nothing.
That's right. Yeah.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to go ahead and get this posted and hopefully have a new set of guests on next week. I am looking to, in a couple weeks, put together a all-time baseball draft. So this is something we did for the off the bench when we first got started, before we had any viewers. We had this awesome idea that we should do a fantasy draft for like all time. And so I'm looking at assembling a crew, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 8. I'm looking to get 8 guys together to kind of run through something like that. So hopefully one of the 2 or both of you can join.
Maybe so.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll let you know. The idea is it would be a live hangout type thing, and then hopefully about an hour. I have to look at the schedule and see who I promised time to, and kind of go from there. All right. Well, thank you both for joining.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks a lot, Sean. Nice to talk to you, Daniel.
Good to talk to you as well. Finally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
All right. Take